Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get started.
All right. Let's see. Where did we leave off last week?
So last week we got into the meeting and the courtship and the marriage between Frank Troy and Bathsheba, which was a completely whirlwind situation. Totally as the narrator says, and as Gabriel thinks, it's totally against all of Bathsheba's character. It's like, where is this even coming from?
Yeah. Do you ever wake up in the morning and go, what just happened? No, I mean, not usually, but that's probably what she did. Like,
what was I thinking?
How did this work out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And he's kind of showing his true personality starting to come out. He's becoming less of the flirtatious, fun, charming guy.
Yes. And we find out that he has a serious gambling problem. And that's a big deal because he's gotten out of the army and now he is really completely financially dependent on Bathsheba and her farm. And he is single-handedly running her farm into the ground.
Yeah.
With his gambling issues. We also found out that he's irresponsible. Like there was the big storm where that could have potentially destroyed like their entire harvest. Gabriel saves everything. Troy gets everybody drunk and does nothing. So
then we also they're like where we really at the very end where we left off. They're walking. Do you remember where they're walking to?
They're just walking back to the farm, I think, from Casterbridge.
They run across Fanny, who is like, does she look like there's something wrong with her? Like she's tired.
Yeah. And Bathsheba doesn't recognize her. And Troy doesn't even recognize her at first. So I kind of get the impression that she is sort of covered a little bit, maybe has a hood on or something. And she's very diminished. Like she's been very unhealthy for a long time, apparently. And so they don't, either of them recognize her at first.
Then he figures, when she talks and he figures out who she is. And he's like, and he tells Bathsheba, oh, I just know her. I know who she is, but like barely. I just know who she is. And Bathsheba's like, no, I don't believe you.
I don't believe you.
Then, doesn't he tells her, he gives her all the money he has. And he says, meet me on Monday at the bridge and I'll bring you whatever I can. And then she just kind of like basically crawls to the Union House.
Yes. Yeah. With the help of a dog, she gets there step by painful step.
Yes.
And that's where we find ourselves. So we're jumping into chapter 41, and I should tell you what it's called because that's what we do. It's called Suspicion and Fanny is Sent For. Okay. There's a lot to that. So the very next day, Troy asks Bathsheba for 20 pounds. He's like, can I just have it? And she's like, oh man, is this going to be for the races? And he's not going to tell her, of course. So he just like lets her believe that it's for the races. And she's like, please don't do this. It's so stupid. Basically, Hardy talks about how she uses basically all of her womanly wiles, like sort of the puppy dog eyes and the pouty lips and whatever. And her tone of voice and everything. She says, come, let me fascinate you by all I can do, by pretty words and pretty looks and everything I can think of to stay home. Say yes to your wife, say yes. And is like, this would have tempted him if he hadn't been married to her. But because they're married, it's not even temptation. Isn't that so sad? In fact, in just a few lines down, he's like, all romance ends with marriage. Really? Okay. That's pathetic. And then to me, like maybe a psychologist or a psychiatrist would listen and be like, no, you're wrong. But to me, he starts doing a bit of gaslighting because he's like, you wrong me by such a suspicious manner. Like such straight waistcoating as you treat me to is not becoming in you at so early a date. Like, you're wrong because you're so suspicious of me. Like, how dare you be suspicious of me, you know? And it's like, you're the crazy one. You're the wrong one, even though he's totally untrustworthy. He does tell her that the money is actually not for like gambling debts, but he doesn't actually tell her what it's for. So this all leads to him saying, well, all romance ends with marriage. And Bathsheba is just like heartbroken. And you can kind of just feel like the knife being buried deeper and deeper with every part of their conversation and their interaction. She's like, you used to call me darling. And, and like, now where are we? And it's kind of sad because it's like, you used to, what, like 2 weeks ago, like they've been married for a few months and
Yeah.
it's already just like, meh, done.
Yeah. And when she's asking him about the money, she's like, I think I have a right to grumble about this if I'm going to give you money. And he says, well, if you ask too much, you're going to regret it.
Like, what a horrible jerk. Very abusive dude. And then he pulls out his watch and opens it up, and Bathsheba sees that there is a lock of golden hair in there. And she's like, whose hair is that? He's like, oh, it's yours. She has black hair. And then finally he's like, oh, well, I had totally forgotten about it until I pulled my watch out. He's like, it belongs to a lady I was going to marry. And I just forgot about that. And so Bathsheba starts sort of interrogating, well, you were going to marry. So is she alive? Yes. Is she pretty? Yes. Like, and then she uses the tactic of trying to like attack this person and act like she's not as good as he thinks she is. She's like, well, just how sad is it that she's been afflicted with blonde hair? He's like, what? Everybody admires her hair and thinks that she's gorgeous and everything. And poor Bathsheba, she's so just desperate at this point. And I think if Gabriel was watching, he'd be like, what even happened to her? But speaking of Gabriel, I think that we have found that he was prophetic in many ways. That when he said in I believe the very first chapter, that her biggest fault is her vanity, because here she is, her vanity made her reject Gabriel, right? She was like, no, like basically you're not good enough for me. And she wouldn't even pursue that. It was also her vanity that made her try to pursue Boldwood, even in such a stupid way. But she's like, well, he's not noticing me, so I'm going to go after him. And then look what happened, right? Yeah. Then he is in hot pursuit of her. And then it's her vanity that made her literally jump into this very stupid marriage, because Troy was like, well, I've seen another lady who's prettier than you. And so I can't guarantee that I'm, going to be faithful. So she's like, okay, I'll marry you.
Yeah.
And now it's her vanity that's just making her just desperate. Like, she's being super critical of this person that she doesn't even know. And I mean, she has every right to be very critical and like of Troy. But the fact that she is just so like desperately clinging on to him, like, no, look, I'm prettier. Like, honey, stop. He's a horrible person. Just let him go. So
yeah, but it's anyway, like that she wants something she can't have.
Yeah
These other guys, she could have them, and she's just like, I need a challenge. Yeah, we all know people like that.
Yeah, well, and I think that we all act that way in certain realms of our life, whether
That's
it's
true.
Relationships or
I think even
whatever.
Just, friendships. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to be friends with those people, the people that, I don't know, the people that wanted to be my friend. It was like, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I was aspiring higher.
And you think, well, but I'm actually too good for you. And it's like, but these are your friends.
Yeah.
So these are actually your people.
And the people who are are nice to you and friends with you, you take them for granted and you're just like, yeah, like, oh, I already got you. I need,
Yeah.
I need to collect more or something.
Yeah.
But none of that
Look
made sense,
further.
but
No, it did. And it's sort of the grass is greener on the other
that's
side
right.
idea. And also like, I'm better than this. And so, yeah, there's a whole lot that goes into it, I think.
Yep. So yeah,
Let's
I
see.
mean, there's a lot in this, like how he just tells her, don't be jealous.
Yeah.
And she wants him to burn the lock of hair. He's like, does he think he says no?
Yeah. He says no. And she's like, you already love somebody better than you love me. And he's like, why do you say that? And she says, well, because you won't burn that hair, which is, I don't know, maybe it's weird, but I feel like that would be kind of a strange request coming from the wife. Like, I think the husband should do it voluntarily without being pushed into it. Otherwise, it would be like not genuine anyway,
She said,
So, like, why do you even want that?
she said, you like the woman who owns that pretty hair. Yes, it is pretty. More beautiful than my miserable black mane. Well, it's no use. I can't help being ugly. You must
I
like
know.
her best, if you will.
Yeah, she's gotten to that point where she's like, well, I guess I'm ugly because
Which is
she's got
funny
pretty hair.
because
Yeah.
she's like known as being like, she's pretty much the most beautiful girl in the area, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. And he
She
says,
doesn't know that the hair belongs to Fanny yet, but even so, yeah, she knows that she's admired everywhere she goes. She is also well off. She's a fairly prosperous farmer. She owns the farm in her own right, it was left to her by her uncle. So she's doing so much better than all these other women, especially this girl. Again, she doesn't know who this girl is, but it doesn't matter. And so for her to be so jealous and just kind of petty is very beneath her, and it's very sad. And I mean, you can understand she's like desperately trying to hold on to her husband, but he's trash. So, and that's really easy for us to say, but there it is.
he's the worst kind of significant other. No.
Oh, yeah.
He even yells at her for being so desperate.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. He's like,
Like,
stop being so desperate. Stop being so jealous. Anyway, and after he says that, he leaves.
yep.
And as soon as he leaves, she sort of has this moment of reflection. And she says that she hated herself now. In those earlier days, she had always nourished a secret contempt for girls who were the slaves of the first good-looking young fellow who should choose to salute them. She had never taken kindly to the idea of marriage in the abstract, as did the majority of women she saw about her. And now here she is. Like, she jumped into this and desperately trying to hold on to it, and it's not working out. And so she feels like she is now in the class of all these people that she had this contempt and hatred for before.
Yep.
And now she finds out, well, guess I've got a lot to learn. Guess I'm not really any better than anybody else.
Yeah, I'm exactly the woman that I didn't like and don't want to be. And she thinks back to her old self as like self-sufficient, respectable, and she's like, if I could just go back to being that again. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, there's always a reason for everything. And she can't go back to where she was before, because even that independent girl had so much pride and vanity that she would just keep going in the same vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And so she has to learn from this and move on, keep her independence, keep her high spirit, but leave the pride behind. Okay. So the next morning, it's still the same chapter. A lot happens in this chapter. So she is just walking around her farm, obviously very distraught, and she sees that Gabriel is already checking on things. Oh, I love this because she sees that he's out already checking on things. And she finds herself preceded in forethought by Gabriel Oak, for whom she began to entertain the genuine friendship of a sister. That's how she sees it. She's like, we have this relationship that's so close, it's like we could be brother and sister. Of course, she sometimes thought of him in the light of an old lover and had momentary imaginings of what life with him as a husband would have been like. So, she actually has like entertained that idea just a little bit. She's allowing herself to, which is a big step. Um, uh, but Bathsheba, though she could feel, was not much given to futile dreaming, and her musings under this head were short and entirely confined to the times when Troy's neglect was more than ordinarily evident. So it's like she basically is feeling so low that she allows herself to sort of muse, like, what would life have been like with Gabriel, But she doesn't generally let herself do that because I think that she is a faithful and true wife, and she knows that those kinds of thoughts are not good in a marriage relationship. And it's in this moment that she finds out the really horrible news. She sees Gabriel and Boldwood talking, and then Boldwood leaves, and she's relieved about that. And then Joseph Poorgrass comes over and says, Fanny Robin has died. And of course, up to this point, she still does not know that Fanny is the woman that Troy loved. Okay. So to her, these are two very different sets of problems. She's got Troy, who has a blonde lock of hair, has walked out on her saying that he loves this other woman. And then over here, she's just found out that Fanny Robin has died. There's no connection for her right now, or for anybody else. Nobody else really knows.
Well, yeah, her only connection is that Fanny was her uncle's servant. That's the only connection she sees right now, is that.
Yes.
She's going to do something. What was it? Because Boldwood's going to send a carriage to get the body.
Well, so he had said that he was going to send a wagon to fetch the body. And Bathsheba was like, no, I'm going to do it because she was a servant in my uncle's house. And I only knew her for a short time, but she was here for a long time. And so I have that responsibility. And I really love this part. And I feel like maybe we could talk about it for a minute, but it says, Bathsheba had begun to know what suffering was, and she spoke with real feeling. And after that, she like puts together the wagon. She very carefully chooses like all this greenery and these flowers so that it's a beautiful setting to go and collect Fanny's body, which is in a coffin. And she wants it to be just well thought out and as peaceful and beautiful as possible. But I was just thinking about that. Okay, so her suffering is obviously a bit different than Fanny's suffering. They both kind of suffer at the hands of the same man, but it's still a bit different. Her suffering is different from like Gabriel's suffering or Boldwood's or other people, but it's still just suffering. And so why is it that when we have had real suffering, we suddenly have so much more empathy and compassion for other people in their suffering? Even if it's not the same kind, it doesn't really matter, Anyway, that's just a thought that I had, is just like suffering is just suffering, and there's many different breeds of it. And unless we've really experienced it, we may have a hard time empathizing with other people and their path and their suffering,
Yeah, I think like the harder your suffering is, I don't know. I guess it's like building up tolerance, I think. Mm-hmm. So like the harder your suffering, the harder things the worse the things are that you go through, the more in the future you can tolerate. Does that make sense?
Well,
so
yeah.
Like I've been thinking about people who are super dramatic about certain things. Mm. And then you look at their life and you're like, well, they haven't really suffered much. Like, so any little bit of suffering is like the end of the world, or this huge deal where you're just like, and I mean, there's varying degrees for everybody, right? Like I've been through a lot, but like not near as much as somebody else that I might know. But it's just interesting. And then when you do go through those things, when you look at other people, you're like, yeah, way more empathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when this is great. I think when you haven't been through hard things, it's harder to be compassionate and empathize with others.
And empathize. It is like you just don't know where they're coming from. And a lot of times you end up being judgmental, I think.
Yeah.
I think
like, get it together.
Yeah. Or like, you must have done something wrong. Or look at all these things leading up to this. Now you need to fix it. It's just, they kind of go into this mode of like, let's fix you, or you did something right. It really does. Like, I love the book of Job because I think that it addresses this idea so much. Like, there's Job. He experiences like every kind of suffering. And you had his friends who came and sat with him at first. And then they started going, well, Job, if you had done this differently and this differently, maybe your kids wouldn't have all died on you, and it's like, nope, like crap happens.
Yeah. And when bad things happen to you, then you realize it. Oh, I
Mhm.
didn't do this.
I actually, yeah,
This
yeah,
didn't, I mean, sometimes you do, but
yeah,
most of the time, no.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
So, and I think it's really interesting, like, yeah, like everybody has hard things. And I think, like for me, the last year has been pretty hard for our family. We've had a couple of things that have been really wonky. And what has been really interesting to me is like the amazing people who have been there for me through it. And I didn't even realize until like this past year the hard things that they've been through in their life, but they shared it with me. And it was like, oh, and so they have been very just supportive and non-judgmental and like so loving. And because they know how to be,
Mhm.
they know what you need in your moment of sorrow and hardship because they've been there. So
When David, let's see, so when I was expecting our first child, and David, my husband, was in the hospital, and for a significant amount of time, we were kind of in and out of the hospital for a couple months.
yeah.
And I was like, after it was over, I was like, I'm going to write a book on what to do for people when they're suffering, because through suffering, I had like realized what people needed and what was
Yes.
helpful. And so, yeah.
Well, I think that you still should. Have you started it? You should. I think that you should. Like, because I think that is a really hard thing. Like, people don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
And so
I mean,
sometimes they do, because I think that there are the people who have this special gift that maybe they haven't been through extreme sorrow in their life, but they just have this incredible heart that they can be there for you. But most people just don't unless they have
yeah.
been there somehow.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, when you have a big problem like that, we didn't know if he was going to live.
yeah.
And I was about to have our first baby. And you just see the people that want to do stuff, and they're just there for you. And then you
Mhm.
see the people that aren't.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
They just can't comprehend what you're going through.
Yeah. Or
But
I struggle with that too. Like, I just don't know what to do sometimes.
yeah.
So
And that's
maybe,
human.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe a book to help people that haven't been through stuff. I don't know. Someday.
Well, and it'd be interesting too to just get like to sort of gather some data from different people who have been through different things and to be like, hey, what really helped you in
That's
that
a great idea.
situation? That actually might be a really fun book to write.
We'll have to
Like
co-author it.
hard. I know. There you go. It'd be hard, but it would be good. I think it'd be
Yeah.
really good. So, anyway, at the end of this chapter, we find out. So, the conversation with Joseph progresses. You can see Bathsheba putting the pieces together, and she's like, the little light bulbs are going on, and she's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And
First she asked if this girl had been walking on like the path that she'd seen that lady on. So that's like the
yeah,
first light bulb.
yes. Yeah. And she asked Joseph what color Fanny Robin's hair was, and he couldn't remember, but he thought that it was light. And anyway, so yeah, that conversation keeps going. And then she talks to Liddy, like you say, And that buttons it all up. Everything is put into place. And this is how it kind of happens. Liddy tells her that one time she had asked Sergeant Troy about if he knew Fanny Robbins, young man who was in the same regiment as Sergeant Troy. And Sergeant Troy's response was, and this is Liddy telling Bathsheba this, that yes, he knew Fanny Robbins' young man. He knew him as well as he knew himself, and he liked him better than anybody in the regiment. Yeah. And
that's when she's like,
he also says, oh, and he also looks a lot like me. In fact, a lot of people sometimes get us confused. So,
oh my gosh.
And I kind of loved poor so Liddy, because she has just no clue whatsoever. And she's, oh yeah, la, 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 la. And Bathsheba's like, for heaven's sake, stop your talking. Because she's put it all together. Yeah. So that was a really long discussion for that chapter, but it was good stuff. Lots of stuff happened. And basically, so chapter 42, we can go through that one a lot faster. It's called Joseph and His Burden and Buck's Head. And it is like tragically funny, sort of dark humor type of thing, because Joseph Poorgrass is sent to Casterbridge to pick up Fanny in this wagon that Bathsheba has very thoughtfully and carefully prepared. He goes and picks her up. And as he's driving back, and it's many miles back to Weatherbury Farm, he's like going through the forest, and it describes how this dense fog comes up, and it's just super creepy. Like you can just imagine, just fog, and you can kind of every once in a while see little bits of color. And all of a sudden, like the leaves above in the trees, they get so full of, of the condensation that the drips of water start coming down on the coffin. And so it's just this like creepy drip, drip, drip. Anyway, he really builds it up. And so Joseph Poorgrass is just going, ah. And so the first like sign of life and goodness outside of the dark and foggy forest is the Buck's Head Tavern. And so he stops there with poor Fanny's coffin in the back of his wagon. And he's like, I'm just going to go in for a drink. And there's his friends, Mark Clark and Jan Coggin. And they're like, oh, she's dead. She's not going anywhere. Have another drink.
And he says, another
drink.
Go ahead. I've had a pale companion for the last 4 miles. And to speak the truth, 'twas beginning to tell upon me. He's like, it's been a little creepy. Trial. Yes. I need a drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and yeah. He keeps saying, like, I need to go to the churchyard. And they're like, just have another drink.
Yeah. And so I believe it's been about 3 hours. He's been sitting there, and he knows that like Parson Thirdly, the parson, right? The clergyman, yeah. Right? Yeah. He's the parson for that area of that parish. He's waiting for Joseph to show up at the churchyard so they can bury Fanny like that evening. So it's just been hours. And finally, Gabriel bursts in, because he had been like, he's like, okay, where are they? And so he probably starts like down the road and just keeps going and going until he arrives at the tavern and is like, oh my gosh. Their exchanges are really funny. It's like they talk about how they're seeing double, and it's this strange thing that happens when I start drinking.
Well, he calls it a multiplying eye.
Yeah, a multiplying eye.
As if phenomenon. This is hilarious. As if he was Noah at the entrance of the ark. That's so funny.
I love it. There's another Bible reference. There you go.
Yeah.
And who says this? Let's see, Coggin. He's like, drink, shepherd, and be friends, for tomorrow we may be like her. Yes. We may die tomorrow, so just stop and drink for a while. And of course, Gabriel's like, no.
Gabriel realizes that there's nobody here capable of taking the wagon to the churchyard.
They're all completely just wasted.
And that people knew about Fanny's death, but they didn't know that Troy was connected to her.
Right.
But Gabriel knows.
And he knows.
So he's hoping that we can like keep this a secret for a little while longer.
Yes.
Trying to protect Bathsheba.
Because Boldwood knows the whole story. And so I'm sure he's confided in Gabriel. And now Gabriel, he decides to take the wagon the rest of the way, obviously, because nobody else can. He just leaves those guys at the tavern. And now he knows even more because so he drives the wagon back with Fanny to Weatherbury Farm. And at this point, it's just too late. And he doesn't have the proper paperwork to get her buried because Joseph Poorgrass has that. And so basically, it ends up that the coffin is going to have to stay in Bathsheba's living room for the night. It doesn't have to, but Bathsheba is actually the one who was like, no, like bring it inside. We're not going to leave it outside all night, you know? And so he's like, okay. Because Gabriel, I think he wanted to leave it outside because he didn't want Bathsheba to see this. So they take it inside. And as he's getting it settled, Gabriel stays in the living room. Everybody else leaves. And it says that he erases part of this chalk writing on there because the people who had placed Fanny in the coffin had written on there, Fanny Robin and child. And so Gabriel erases and child. And that's, so now we know. It had never said anything before, but Fanny Robin was pregnant with Troy's child. And so both she and the baby had died. And evidently she was quite far along because they were able to tell just from her, her body.
Well, she is later, you see, we'll get to that.
Yes.
Because the child is in her arms. She's holding the baby.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, she like
did not. Oh my gosh, I totally missed that.
I kind of wonder if she, because we'll talk about that later.
I have read it several times, but I've always been like, was she holding the baby? But I just have never seen evidence of it. So, okay, I'm excited. Okay.
We'll see if we can find it.
Over to you.
Okay. So the chapter 43 is Fanny's revenge. So Bathsheba tells Liddy that she doesn't need any more help. And so Liddy offers to stay with the body. And then Bathsheba is asking all these questions. She's trying to like gain more information about it, right? She's like, asks Liddy, was Fanny sickly, or had anybody noticed that there was something wrong with her? Liddy's like, no. And then she says, well, it would be impossible for her to die of consumption like the day after she had walked all those miles. And so she asks if she'd heard anything strange about Fanny. Liddy says no. And Bathsheba just bursts into tears and says goodnight. Yeah. She's like a mess. She's figuring this all out.
Yeah.
And she's trying to figure out why Fanny would have just died so suddenly. Like, which she probably died in childbirth is my guess.
Yeah.
Well, so then later, Liddy comes up to Bathsheba's door and says that Marianne had heard a rumor that there are 2 people in the coffin. So, and Bathsheba says, well, the coffin only lists one name on the nameplate. Liddy says other people didn't believe it either. That Gabriel says this story she's hearing is about another girl. So he's just totally trying to protect Bathsheba this whole time. So she kind of sits there in the living room and staring into the fire for hours. And she's just like stewing over what she's learned and what's going on. She knew, that she had ran into Fanny the week before, but Gabriel and Boldwood did not know that she had run into Fanny. And she says that she wishes she could go talk to Gabriel about this because he's really good at knowing like what to do and not worrying about himself. Like he's not like Boldwood or Troy, right? That are self-serving. And if she go ahead.
Well, I just love that because I was like, that is such a, maybe it's a feminine thing. I don't know. But again, I love how Hardy he's observed and he knows. Like when we have something traumatic, we just need to talk to somebody about it. And it can't just be anybody. It has to be like somebody that we know is going to be sympathetic and is going to listen and going to be like, Yeah, or that's going to tell us the truth, which is in her case, she's like, I just want to go talk to somebody. I want to talk to Gabriel. He knows he's going to tell me the truth and he's going to be, again, like sympathetic. Anyway, I love that. Okay.
Yeah, she knows that he's the one, I don't know, the best one. Yes. I think she's seeing that all around, right?
Yeah, totally.
So she walks over to his cottage and there's a light on and he's reading and she watches him for a while, but she's afraid to go in and talk to him. So she sees him go upstairs and she sees him in the window upstairs that he starts praying. And so she decides not to bother him. So she goes back home. And when she gets back home, she's kind of in the hall, which I think is right outside where Fanny is. And she says aloud that she wishes Fanny would tell her whatever her secret was. And then it says she goes into the room and without thinking, she just opens the coffin. I wrote down at this point, Bathsheba is willing to do anything except go talk to Gabriel that will give her information to help her decide what to do next. So like going and opening up the coffin was, I wouldn't do that. I don't like things that aren't alive anymore.
Especially, and it's so sad.
I know. So, and then, so she says, oh, I hate her. Yet I don't mean that I hate her, for it is grievous and wicked. And yet I hate her a little. Yes, my flesh insists upon hating her, whether my spirit is willing or no. If she had only lived, I could have been angry and cruel towards her with some justification, but to be vindictive towards a poor dead woman recoils upon myself. Oh, God, have mercy. I am miserable at all this.
Well, I thought it was interesting. It talked about, the name of this chapter is Fanny's Revenge. And it's sort of like, I think it mentions it a little bit earlier. Basically, Fanny has been immortalized in as being this perfect person, and so that's always how she's going to be remembered. She's sort of, she's a victim. She was very ill. Life had done her wrong. And so she's always going to be remembered as a beautiful and tragic character, especially for Troy. And he shows that, like, he was so cruel to her in life. Mm-hmm. But now that she's dead, it's like, well, but at the same time, like, none of this is Fanny's fault. Like, other than the fact that she did go and like tried to beg Troy to come to whatever. But, and I mean, in these days when we talk about consent, I assume there was some consent there with her relationship with Troy, but he had promised her that he would marry her. She had like tried to pursue that, to be like, no, you need to marry me, and then she had to leave because she was evidently pregnant. And just all these things that happened down to her death are just really, she is a very tragic victim in all this. And Troy he's just, as we've said many times, he's just the worst.
He's just awful. Yeah. And so like in this moment, she realizes that her husband prefers Fanny. So that's awful. Like, this becomes clear. Yeah. But then she realizes she's made a huge mistake in marrying him. And now she's going to have to suffer the consequences. In that moment, she remembers that Gabriel had been praying. And so she thinks, well, I'm going to pray. So she kneels down and starts to pray. And she feels better when she stands up, and then she goes and puts those flowers around Fanny's head. And then she hears Troy coming in. She hears the coach, and then he's coming into the room to see what's going on. And he doesn't know anything about this. He doesn't know Fanny's dead. This is all new to it.
I just found it.
You did?
Okay. The candle was standing on a bureau close by them, and the light slanted down, distinctly enkindling the cold features of mother and babe.
There you go.
There you go.
Two words.
But how did I miss that before? How have I missed it like over and over again? I guess I was reading it fast.
Is it when Troy is coming in?
When Troy is in.
So we're looking at the wrong spot.
Yeah.
So he comes in and he has no idea that it's Fanny laying in the coffin. And so he asks her what's happened. She kind of says, I need to get out of here. Mm-hmm. Let me go. And he insists that she stays, and he grabs her hand and they walk up to the coffin together. He looks in and he has no reaction, which I think is kind of interesting. And then she asks, do you know her? If we're going to go through this again. And he says he does. And then he says, that's Fanny. And he leans in and kisses her. Like I said in there, like an infant.
Which that line right there, like that it's so sad. Especially whenever anybody says kissing somebody's cheek like you'd kiss a sleeping infant. And I'm like, oh, it makes me think of my babies. But the fact, like, it's so sad.
Yeah.
This poor Fanny and her sweet baby. And now we know it was like actually she did have her baby and they've both passed away. And it's so sad.
Yeah. So he I get the feeling that she wants to approach this with Troy as like a married couple. But then when he bends down and kisses her, she's like, oh, this is a whole nother situation I didn't explain. And so she springs at him and is like, kiss me too.
Yeah.
Begs him to kiss her.
Don't kiss them, kiss me.
Yeah.
Oh, and she says, don't kiss them.
But she does.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Don't kiss me. And it's like he says he can't believe that this was his proud wife. Like, again, she's so desperate. He's like, what happened to you? You were just this beautiful, And Troy says, I'm not going to kiss you. It's so awful. Fanny is more dead than I don't know what it says exactly, but Fanny is more dead than Bathsheba ever was or will be. Says,
yeah. This is more to me.
Is more to me.
Yeah.
Oh, is more to him dead.
Yes.
Then yes. I'm like, she's not more dead, more to him dead. This is how he says it. This woman is more to me dead as she is than you ever were or are or can be. If Satan had not tempted me with that face of yours and those cursed coquetries, I should have married her. I never had another thought till you came in my way. So yeah, he's like, I was going to marry her, but then you came in and you tempted me. Would to God that I had, but it is all too late. I deserve to live in torment for this. He turned to Fanny then, but never mind, darling. In the sight of heaven, you are my very, very wife. It's like knife in the chest and twist it.
Yeah. And my favorite is that he's very consistent. He just thinks he can change the rules. What he says is, in the beginning, he's like, well, it's not going to rain. It totally rains, And right here, he's like, a ceremony before a priest doesn't make a marriage. I am not morally yours. It's like, well, actually, like literally everybody ever would completely disagree with you in that assessment. But sure, like change the rules, man. Neat.
Yeah. So Troy says to her, she starts wailing and she's like, what are you to me? And he says, you're nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You're nothing to me. And so she turns and runs out. But I think this, even in death, Fanny won.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Bathsheba still has feelings for Troy, which is awful because where he used to be like flirtatious and teasing, now he's just cruel.
Yeah.
And maybe because he's feeling guilty for how he treated Fanny. I don't know.
Oh,
but
for sure. I think there's a lot of guilt and also victimhood. Like he thinks he treats Bathsheba as if it's her fault. Like he's like, well, if the devil hadn't tempted me with your beautiful face, like he's very much
blaming.
He's blaming. He wants to play the victim instead of taking any real responsibility. So while there's guilt, there's also like wanting to displace that guilt and put the blame on somebody else.
Yeah. Oh, he's a fun one. Okay. So chapter 44, under a tree reaction. Hopefully we can go through this really quick. So Bathsheba runs away and she's kind of not paying attention to where she's going. She's just like, I'm getting out of here. She ends up by the trunk of a tree and she sits down and closes her eyes. And then later she kind of wakes up and she hears some birds and a plowboy. This is funny because it's like this dramatic part of the book. And then you kind of have this comedy right here where this boy is trying to memorize a verse. And he's like, I think it said in there that he was probably a dunce, like, because he's repeating the same words. Like,
Yeah.
it's just funny how it's
desperately trying to memorize.
Yeah. He's repeating it over and over. So then she sees Liddy coming down the road and she calls to her. And she's like by the swamp. It says Liddy comes through the swamp and then starts asking Bathsheba some questions. Bathsheba's like, I don't want to talk. Don't ask me any questions. But then she starts asking Liddy questions. Has Fanny been taken away yet? Liddy says, no, they're going to come get her at 9:00. And then she goes and gets some food and tea for Bathsheba, who doesn't want to go inside. So now Bathsheba's like, I need to avoid this situation. I need to avoid Troy. Like she's trying to stay away from him. So they kind of wander in the woods for hours because she doesn't want to go. She says that she wonders if she might never go home again.
Yeah, she kind of determined that she wasn't going to. And then she had a little bit of a change of heart.
Yeah, she's like, only women without pride would run away. So I'm going to stick this out. I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
So finally they come back to the house, but they sneak in through the back. She's trying to avoid Troy. And so she asks Liddy to like make the attic comfortable. So her and Liddy and Marianne can kind of hang out up there so she can avoid him. And this is I think another funny part is that she's asked Liddy, well, what are we going to do up there? Liddy's like, well, we could sew. And she's like, no. And she's like, well, we could knit. No. And she's like, we could work on your samplers. No. But so she asks Liddy to bring her some old books. And she says, I'm not in the mood to read anything new. So she gives her this list of books that she could bring to her. And they stay up there all day long. But Troy doesn't even ever appear or try to find her or anything. So it's kind of funny. She's trying to distance herself from Troy in their house. And I think this is funny because this is how I was when like my husband and I first got married and we would have arguments is I would like retreat. I'd be like, I'm just going to stay in my bedroom all day and not talk to him. And then he's going to know that I'm really mad. He didn't care.
He's probably like, sorry.
Yeah. He's probably like, I have control of the TV. And like I'm sitting in there stewing for hours and he probably has no clue. So I just thought that was funny.
That's really funny. And so but that's exactly like what she was doing. Because she's like, I'm just going to stay here indefinitely.
And he doesn't even care.
He doesn't even care. He's not even there. And we find out he had not really even given her a second thought. So
nope. He doesn't go look for her. He's just like, so she's doing all this for like.
She's literally hurting herself. And
yes.
Else. Yeah.
Okay, so as we move into chapter 45, Troy's romanticism. Okay, so after Bathsheba had run away and was doing all this stuff, we're kind of backtracking in time to see like what his reaction was. He had thrown himself on the bed and was just waiting for morning. So that day, he had put together 27 pounds and he had driven to Casterbridge to meet Fanny because they had arranged for this meeting on the bridge. And he had told her I was going to bring all the money I can. So that's how much he had. So he had sat down to wait for her. And he didn't know that she was dead. At the moment, she was being put in a coffin.
Yeah.
So that's what had happened that day. So then in the next morning, he drives to Casterbridge to go see the mason to talk about what kind of a gravestone, this 27 pounds that he had saved or had acquired, what kind of gravestone it could buy. And so the mason shows him what he has to offer. And Troy says, this is what I want written on the stone. And so after that, he rides back to Weatherbury churchyard with this gravestone. So he comes back and he brings with him a spade and a lantern, and he starts planting flowers, beautiful flowers around her grave. As he finishes, he feels it start to rain. And he's like, I'll just finish this another day. And he I think that this is showing that he really does love Fanny. Like he cares because he's planting these flowers. But any little thing, like a few raindrops, is going to stop him from doing this.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Well, and even to back up a little bit in the same chapter when it talks about how he went to Casterbridge to meet her, after he'd been waiting for a little bit, he started to get mad at her because he's like, oh, she's doing this again. And he immediately assumes the worst. And so he goes off to the races, you know?
yeah.
And so it's like I think he likes the idea of her more than he actually likes her. Because I don't know that he actually really likes anybody except himself, you know? And so yeah, so he does these grand gestures, but when it comes to having any integrity or really any follow through, it's just not there.
Kind of like when he said he was going to marry her and she went to the wrong church and he's like, any sign of trouble, he's like, yeah, forget it.
Yeah, exactly.
So he doesn't even really love the woman he loves.
Yeah. No, I don't think that he's actually capable of loving anybody besides himself. I think, yeah. So interesting. Okay, so 46. I found this really interesting, this whole chapter. Well, the whole next couple chapters. So 46 is called The Gurgoyle, Its Doings. We call them gargoyles. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what it's talking about. But the first several paragraphs of the chapter are just talking about these grotesque and nasty 400-year-old, very Gothic style gargoyles all over the church. And several of them are not even in commission anymore. They can't even be used. But there's two that are, and they do the job just fine of draining all the water from the roof, right? And displacing it, putting it someplace else. Well, it just so happened that this hideous gargoyle, there's a rain, like there hasn't been rain in a long time. And this hideous gargoyle is like literally spitting all of its water right onto Fanny's grave, which was very poor planning on somebody's part, right? And so it talks about it like turning it into sort of almost like this churning hot chocolate type of thing. I mean, that's kind of what I got from it. And it pulls up all of the flowers that Troy had planted, all of them. Like he planted all these bulbs. He planted a lot, not every single one that he brought, but he planted a lot, and all of them are uprooted and just cast everywhere. And so Troy awakes that the next morning. He actually like slept on the porch of the church. And so he goes and he sees that all of his work had been destroyed. And instead of doing anything about it, he's just like, ugh. And so he heads to Budmouth. 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 There you go. Perfect.
I just
which
listened
is
to it.
where like, good. Which is where like the races are, you know. So he sort of escapes. He heads down the road to Budmouth. And now everybody knew that there was a horrible storm. In the morning, Bathsheba, she wakes up. She hadn't actually been to see where Fanny had been buried. She can't like bring herself to, but Liddy's like, don't you want to just go see? Oh, and it does talk about how the night before she'd kind of looked out and she had seen this light down in the churchyard, and she couldn't help but feel that there was some sort of connection between her rival Fanny and the light through the trees, that something was going on. And of course, we know that that was the light that Troy was using as he was planting the flowers, and he's going back and forth. So anyway, she finally does head down to the churchyard. Troy's already gone. She goes down and she sees that Gabriel is actually already there, and he's gazing at the headstone. And as much as he would like to keep her from it, he cannot. And so she sees what Troy has had engraven on the headstone. And it says, erected by Francis Troy in beloved memory of Fanny Robin. And it says that Oak saw her, and his first act was to gaze inquiringly and learn how she received this knowledge of the authorship of the work, which to himself had caused considerable astonishment. Like, Gabriel knows the history. He knows that the connection between Troy and Fanny, he knows that there's a baby, but I don't think even he could comprehend how Troy could do something this
like
just flagrant.
Yeah.
And so Bathsheba at this point, we've talked about all of her just like emotional outbursts and her meltdowns and stuff. And at this point, I think she's done. Like there's nothing more for her. And so instead of having a meltdown, she asks Gabriel to fix the grave, to get a shovel and fix it, because it's really just the rain has just destroyed it. And she herself actually goes in and replants all the flowers. And a thought that I had is Gabriel Oak, he continually comes in and fixes the things that Troy leaves in ashes, like over and over again. Troy leaves things burning. Oak comes in and fixes it, and we'll just continue to see that. So that is another aspect of Gabriel Oak's character. And in this case, that is what Bathsheba is doing too. She comes in and she fixes what Troy has destroyed.
I just wrote down that she also asked the church warden to turn the gargoyle's mouth so that it won't do it again.
Yes. Yeah. I'm glad that you remembered that, because I think that's really important. Like she thought of all the contingencies and all the details to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. Because again, I think that we're seeing this maturity and this changing in Bathsheba, which was needed, to where she's not needing vengeance on Fanny.
Okay.
47 is called Adventures by the Shore. It's a very short chapter. And so I'm just going to very quickly summarize it because, but jump in if there's anything else that you want to talk about. But basically, Troy is making his way to Budmouth, but as he's going, evidently it's like along the shore, and he like looks down and he's like, oh, that water looks so inviting. I want to go swimming. And it is a place where people commonly go swimming, but it's also a place where people are commonly drowned because it's very, very dangerous. And so he takes off all his clothes, leaves them on the shore, gets in the water. And then after just a short time, he realizes he's made a mistake. He's getting swept along. He can't catch on to anything. So he's like thinking, like this is the end. But then all of a sudden he sees a boat. And as luck would have it, the light was such that the sailors in the boat could clearly see him. And so they hustle over, they row over, and they're able to rescue him. And then they cart him off to their ship. And we'll learn more about that later. But anyway, so he nearly drowns, but he doesn't.
Right.
Chapter 48 is called Doubts Arise and Doubts Linger. Interesting. So we're diving a little bit more into Bathsheba's point of view. It says that she has pretty much come to grips with the fact that she's going to lose the farm. She I guess they like rent the house, or however it works. They do have to like pay somebody every year, whether that's like a mortgage or a rental or whatever that is. But there's never been a problem. And the guy who owns it all, or however that works, he had complete faith in her uncle, James Everdeen, and she's doing just great and has been. But she's realizing that poverty is inevitable and she's probably going to lose everything. But one day she makes her way to Casterbridge. And this is the first time that she's gone since I think she was married. And as she goes in there, she overhears a couple of men talking, and one says to the other, "Is like, I'm looking for Mrs. Troy." And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, there she is over there." And the first guy says, "I have some awkward news to break to her. Her husband is drowned." Bathsheba hears this, and her immediate reaction is to faint. She passes out. And as luck would have it, Boldwood
he's right there.
He's right there, just watching everything happen. And as she passes out, she doesn't hit the ground because he catches her. anyway, he takes care of her, makes sure that everything's going to be okay. And then he goes to try to find out more as she awakens, becomes conscious of everything. And then she actually does drive herself home. And when she gets there, like Liddy has already found out what has happened. And she says to her, can I, how about your clothes? Like, we need to get you morning clothes, right? And Bathsheba was like, I'm not going to wear morning clothes because Frank's not dead.
Mm-hmm.
And you read that and immediately go, okay, well, she's in like serious denial. But you find out that she actually she really does not believe that he's dead. On the one hand, she's like, well, it shouldn't happen this way. And I think that anyone who has suddenly lost someone in their life would probably think the same thing. Like, no, I should have felt something. I should have felt like a loss, or I should have seen this coming, or yeah, there should have been like a huge pause in the universe if this person in my life had passed away. Like, this is not right. This is not right. And so she is a little bit in denial. But then a few days later, she reads the newspaper and she reads the eyewitness account of a guy named Mr. Barker, MD of Budmouth. And he said that he actually saw a bather who was carried along in the current outside the mouth of the cove. And he was like, there's no way that swimmer could have survived unless he was like a swimming pro and very, very strong. And this guy had even like walked along to try to follow him, but the bather had disappeared. And then the second piece of evidence for Bathsheba is that they brought her all of his clothes that he had been wearing. And just by virtue of the fact that there's like all these things in his pockets, and it just seems like he had meant to put them back on. Like, and so the fact that they're there on the shore, she's like, okay, I guess he's gone.
Yeah.
So, and the last thing is that she pulls his watch out and she finds Fanny Robin's hair and she almost burns it, but then she doesn't.
Yeah, she wants to keep it in memory of her. But she also kind of wonders if he did it. Like, maybe he wanted to follow Fanny.
Yeah.
Maybe he wanted to go with her. That could be why he died. Maybe he did it on purpose. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So interesting. But yeah, of course. So he comes back to the shore and his clothes are gone. And then he gets that offer to go, like a ship needs workers or something. And he thinks, I've done so much damage to Bathsheba. I might as well go. It'd be better for her if I just disappear.
Yeah.
So he decides to go.
Yeah.
Away. Interesting. Okay. So chapter 49, Oak's advancement, a great hope. So it's winter. Bathsheba is kind of more calm than she has been, but she's still not at peace with everything. She's still upset that Troy is not hers. She's like, get over this, lady.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah.
Please.
It would take a while. That she was like head over heels for whatever reason.
Yes, she can't let it go. So it says that she lost interest in farming, but it was just like, it just kept going. She'd hired Gabriel to do the things that she didn't want to do. But then Boldwood is also kind of going through something because probably he's just upset about the whole situation with Bathsheba. And so he kind of neglects his crops and they're failing. And so he asks Gabriel if he wants to take over his farm too. And at first Bathsheba's like, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's too much for him. But Boldwood insists, I need him. So here we have Gabriel, who just keeps getting wealthier and wealthier.
Yeah.
Right. And more handsome and more handsome. But the people around him are saying how cheap he is because his lifestyle isn't changing. So it doesn't look like he's moving up.
And I was just like, because the word they use is, they think that he is a near man. And And
Oh.
some were beginning to consider Oak a near man because his financial situation had significantly improved, but he continued to like wear the same clothes, live in the same little house, make his own bed with his own hands, and make his food and things. And so I was just trying to look it up because I was like, what does that mean? Does it mean that they thought he was cheap or that he was crazy? Like, I don't know.
What the synopsis I wrote or read said cheap, but they thought he was cheap.
Interesting.
Because his lifestyle ain't any better. And he doesn't care what other people think.
Right. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So Boldwood is like an emotional wreck. He secludes himself, neglects his crops. And then you've got Gabriel, who's like steady, and he's like steadily climbing the ladder.
And he's on top of things. They give him a horse and he is covering, like, what does it say? Like 2,000 acres of land.
Wow.
To make sure it's all running the way that it needs to. And yeah, that's pretty awesome.
This is funny. So Bathsheba has started wearing mourning clothes because she's probably accepted the fate that he's probably dead. And so Boldwood now has a new hope of marrying her, of winning her. And so he's talking about if she marries anybody again, he hopes it will be him. And then during the haymaking, he asks Liddy about her awkwardly. He's like,
very awkwardly.
Yeah. Do you think she'll ever consider marrying again? And Liddy says, well, she hasn't said anything. And then she kind of says, if she does, I think it'll be in 7 years. And she thinks that Boldwood is super dumb.
Yeah.
Like, you think she's going to marry you? And it was like, I think she will after 7 years, but it's been a year. So 6 more years.
So 6 years.
Yeah. And, Liddy asks Boldwood, have you approached Bathsheba about this? And he says, he turns red, leaves, and feels ashamed. So he's like, no, I haven't talked to her about it. But yeah. So do you have anything else for that chapter?
With himself. Well, I was just thinking about it. I was like, you can't help but feel bad for Boldwood.
Yes.
Like, and he goes away feeling so angry at himself. First of all, I love the word vexed. And I think that we should use it more. But anyways, he's very vexed with himself, just very frustrated with himself because he had acted like an idiot. And he knew he had. And I was like, how many times? I don't know. Maybe you never do. But there's all these times I'm like, I am at least a fairly intelligent person. And yet I'll have these exchanges with people sometimes that I go away and I'm like, wow, well, they think I'm a complete fool. And like, that's fair.
I proved it.
Because I acted like one. So whatever. And you just feel bad for him because he's probably like, I am an intelligent, like established farmer. And I just acted like a total fool.
Do you ever feel like you're around people that there's certain people that intimidate me where then whenever I'm around them, I find myself saying stupid things. Totally. And it's usually somebody that I feel, I want to say insecure, but that's not the word, like inferior to.
Okay.
So like maybe somebody who makes a lot of money or somebody who's like an important position or something. And I always leave and I'm like, I know it's my thinking when I'm in the conversation that makes me say stupid things, but then I leave and I'm like, oh my gosh, I sound like such an idiot.
Yeah, no. And that makes me think like when you say like people with a lot of money, sometimes they'll come across as like very refined or something. And sometimes when I'm around them, I find myself doing things that I'm like, I don't even do this normally, but this is making me look like total like trailer trash, like that I was literally raised in a barn. And this is not how I am, but I find myself like lowering myself to the way that I think they perceive me.
Yep, exactly.
That makes sense?
Yep.
So,
I've heard that when you're worried about somebody thinking something of you, it's because you actually think that of you.
Yeah.
So that totally makes sense. Somehow we got to like get out of our own heads when we're talking to people that intimidate
totally.
us.
Yeah. To be like, no, like I do actually have something interesting to say. And if we really don't have anything interesting to say, I guess being quiet is not a bad idea because then they just never know.
You're like, why don't I just not say anything?
Yeah. Oh, I wrote this down because, like I said, I just felt for him so much in this. And so I wrote, I was thinking about when I was a senior in high school and I was in a seminary class because I was thinking about like just continuing to like dig yourself into this hole deeper and deeper because you can see him like trying to like make intelligent remarks and tie things together somehow. And it's just not working. And it's just digging this hole for him. And so I was thinking about when I was a senior in high school and it was like the last week of school or the last couple of weeks. And in seminary, they had, I think they called it seminary day or something. And for that day, they had people sign up and they wanted people to sing and do these performances. And then at the end, they would have a testimony meeting. So I'd been in like the advanced choirs and things. And so these sophomore girls had asked me if I would sing with them. And I was like, sure. And then these junior girls had asked if I would accompany them on the piano while they sang. And I was like, sure. Okay. So we get to seminary that day and I play the piano for those girls and I messed up. I don't even know how many times. It was awful. And then I get up to sing and my voice was so dry that I'm going to hit the high notes and it cracked like 3 times. So mortifying. And you would think after that, I would just be like, you know what? I'm just going to sit down, just wait out the rest of the day. But no, the testimony meeting part comes around and I get up and I'm like fumbling my way through it. And then the bell rings like in the middle of my testimony. And it was just awful. I was like, I'm going to wear, I'm going to wear a sack on my head for the rest of school.
Just go home and get in bed.
I know.
Can't get any worse.
I'm such a moron. Like, should have just stopped while I was ahead.
But probably nobody even noticed or cared. Just you.
Except people actually did laugh when my voice cracked. I was singing.
Well, never mind.
Yeah.
But then they forgot about it.
Probably. I mean, after all these years, I'm sure they did, but I didn't because it was traumatizing.
It is traumatic. I have like visions of myself saying stupid things to people, like strangers that come back to me all the time. I'm like, I was 8 years old and I said this stupid thing to the neighbor. I'm like, why can I not forget that?
And if we just could really put our mind around the fact that those people have forgotten it, they don't even care. They probably didn't even care in the moment, honestly.
It was 35 years ago. They probably did.
Okay, that's not funny, but yes, like they don't even care. Like, why are we caring so much?
Right.
Anyways, poor Boldwood.
Oh, that's really funny.
Bless his heart. We need him to just go away because he's driving us crazy, but we still feel bad for him.
Yes, poor guy. He's dumb. Okay, so that was it.
Yeah. Lots of good stuff. The story keeps building and building. In the next section, next time we're going to be, wrapping it all up. And there's just some unexpected things happen. Some people come back into the picture that you don't think are going to. And there's just all these twists and turns, lots of events that you're like, wow, didn't see that coming, but it's kind of exciting. It's good stuff. And it's kind of an amazing ending. So I'm excited.
I know it'll be fun. We've been working on this book for a long time. So
yeah,
it'll be fun to end it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that this is a really good place to talk about what we've been reading.
This is my favorite part. I mean, it's not my favorite part because I like the other part too. So I don't know.
It's all favorite. All favorite. So what have you been reading?
So I just finished Signal Fires by Dani Shapiro. Have you ever heard of Dani Shapiro?
So it's funny because I've heard a lot about that one lately.
Yeah.
I haven't read anything by that author, but
so a couple years ago, I read, she has like a memoir about, it's called Inheritance. And so in that book, she basically, after her parents are gone, figures out, she has a DNA test and figures out that her father wasn't her father. And so she goes on this big, long, like search to figure out who her father was. Well, her father was a doctor in Portland, Oregon, that was donating sperm, like prolifically. Is that the right word? Yeah. So very interesting. And so she goes on this, like, she gets to meet all these half siblings that had been, you know, in multiple different families. It was very interesting. And I like DNA. So that was interesting. So that's like, she's written a couple of memoirs, but this book, it says, is like the first fiction book she's written in 15 years. And it was pretty good. So it's about this family with, well, there's 3 teenagers in a car one night and they're drinking and there's an accident and one of the teenagers passes away. And their father, who is a doctor, is the first one on the scene. So they're all kind of traumatized by this night, and there's secrets around what happened. Like one of them says they were driving, but they weren't. And so like it kind of goes, so they're just, and they never talk about it again. So they've got this secret behind them. Well, this family moves in down the street, this Jewish couple, and the woman is pregnant, and she goes into labor and she's not going to make it to the hospital. So this man comes over and delivers the baby, the doctor across the street. And he does some things that like save the baby. I mean, if he hadn't been there, this baby
would have died.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the baby is interesting because he's like he doesn't have friends. He like is really into astronomy, constellations. His dad doesn't really understand him. Anyway, so he becomes friends with this doctor. It's very interesting. I liked it. I don't want to tell too much more because
sounds like quite the story. Like there's a lot to it.
Yeah, these 2 families are very connected in the end. So basically most of the book, the wife of the doctor her brain is failing her, right? She has dementia. And so this boy is kind of connected with him and helping him through that. Anyways, that's good. I liked it. I think I told you I loved it. And then I read what I talked about last week, Running for My Life.
Which I am just about through. And I've ordered a copy because I am reading it to my kids. I was like, this needs to be required reading for my children. And then I was like, whenever I do that, I never have a way of tracking it. So I'm going to read it to them, all of them, big kids and little kids. I love it so much. And I think it's such an important story for kids to hear.
I told you.
So good. Yeah.
I keep telling people and nobody's ever heard of it. And so I'm kind of like, I wonder what she thought of it. I wonder if you read it. I loved it. So anyways, I read that the next day. And so it kind of overshadowed the Dani Shapiro book. But I liked that one until I read Running for My Life. And then I was like, this is the best book I've read in months.
It's incredible. So love it. So
besides that, what are you reading?
Okay, so I thought I would share about the book that I'm currently reading to my kids because those are always some of my favorites. So we're reading a book called The Kite Writer by Geraldine McCaughrean. I think that's how you say it. I know there's the book The Kite Runner.
Yeah, I was like,
it's not that one. No. Not that one. I know. In fact, when I first heard about The Kite Runner, I had actually already read The Kite Writer to my kids like 9 or 10 years ago. And so when I first heard Kite Runner, I was like, this is like a big deal to everybody. Like we totally read that. And anyway, forgot that there were very different words. Yes. Very different concepts too. So The Kite Writer takes place in medieval China. It's 13th century China. Of course, their dates and things are different, but according to our timeline, it would be 13th century China. So this is when the Mongols had their empire throughout China. And China is actually called like Cathay. So the Mongols are ruling, but the Chinese consider the Mongols to be barbarians. But they're interspersed throughout, they're everywhere. And Kublai Khan is the current emperor of China, as well as all these other parts all throughout Asia and even parts of Europe that the Mongols have conquered. Anyway, so this little boy, Hao Yu, he becomes a kite rider. And this was a thing. The kites, I believe they were invented in China. I'm pretty sure they were. And for a time, they had people like riding kites, like way up into the sky.
Like RIDING?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said writing, like WRITING.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Like ride the kites. Like they would strap them to the kites and they would be flying up in the air. Okay. And so the thing is that this little boy, his father was a sailor, and it starts out with him going down to the docks with his father, and his father's a sailor, and the first mate of the ship is super jealous of Hao Yu's father. His name is Pei, because Pei has a gorgeous wife, and they're all very poor, very very much peasants. So for this woman to be beautiful, it's very not super common. I mean, anyway, so this first mate is super jealous, and he has Hao Yu's father strapped to this kite that captains of ships, they would set the kites up, sailing up into the air the day of a voyage to make sure that the luck would be with them. And if the kite flew straight and true, it was going to be a good voyage. If it was like all over the place and wobbly, then they would delay because the voyage was not going to be good luck. They would go another day. So they had these people that would be strapped to the kites, and they would be the wind testers. So Hao Yu's father, under much protest, and he's actually like knocked out, I believe, when he's strapped to this kite, and he comes to quickly when he's like finds himself sailing in the air and the kite is like going all over the place. He dies of heart failure on this kite, which you can imagine if it's something that you are not like absolutely terrifying, something you're not planning on. So scary. So he dies. It kills him. And so Hao Yu and his mother and his little sister, they're completely destitute. They're like relying on their great uncle to take care of them. He wants to marry his Hao Yu's mother off to this awful first mate who's responsible for Pei's death. Hao Yu, one way or the other, like just through a series of events, he ends up riding a kite, and this circus master sees him doing it, and he's like, I will pay you a lot of money to come be part of my circus, and you can travel with me, and I'll take care of you, and you can have plenty of money to send back to your mother, and you're going to be the kite rider. And so from there on, it's just all these adventures that he has being a kite rider. At one point, one of the little girls that is part of a family that is with the circus, she goes missing in the rice paddies. She's 2 years old, and they're just absolutely terrified that she's going to drown in the rice paddies. And so he flies up on the kite, even though it's not a good day for flying on the kite. So because he can see, everything, and he's able to save her. After a time, they actually use it as a military strategy, and they come across Kublai Khan himself and perform for him, and also are almost killed by him. Anyway, there's lots to it. So you learn lots about that period of time in China, the culture, their superstitions, their ways. It's really, really fascinating. Very good book. So
kind of gives me vibes. Remember that I think it was a Disney movie with the girl that dove the horses. Is that what
the
diving horses?
Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken.
Yes.
Yeah.
That reminds me of that kind of.
Yeah. Like this totally kind of random sport that nobody knows about. But
yeah, and she's like traveling with the circus or whatever, like fairs, and doing it in Anyway, that was a good movie. I haven't watched that movie in like
It
30
was
years.
a good movie. Yeah, it was a really good movie.
That sounded kind of similar. Just this strange, like, I don't know.
Yeah, completely random sport. But that is actually so funny that you brought that up, because today we were reading and he takes this like really bad dive
Oh gosh.
from the kite, and he falls in. And today we were reading about how he was able to save this little girl because he risked his life basically to go up into the air when it was, I mean, it was windy, but not very. And the rope started to pull him down. So he like cut loose from the rope. So he's just like floating in the air on this kite, but he spots her, and then the kite starts to dive and he just like crashes face first. And then after it's all over, he's like, and some of the mud I couldn't even wipe out of my eye. It was like some of the mud got right into my brain and just, made a splotch there. And I can't remember if he ends up going blind. But anyway, so I was totally thinking of Wild Hearts.
Oh gosh.
Because I was like, oh, remember when she had the horrible crash and then she went blind. Anyways.
Such a sad movie.
Yeah.
But yes, one I have to introduce my children to now.
Yeah. Okay. We're so happy you joined us for this episode. We hope you will join us next week as we discuss Far from the Madding Crowd, chapters 50 to 57. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.